Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is a special live episode of Dispatches. It's been 10 months of US-backed Israeli live-stream genocide in Gaza. 10 months of Palestinians being bombed, beheaded, raped, displaced, and forced to collect the body parts of their children into bags. 10 months of the Biden administration's ironclad support for this barbarism. And 10 months of Israel trying to spread the Gaza genocide across the region, with repeated attempts at triggering a war with Hezbollah and Iran that would force more direct involvement from the US. The latest provocation came at the end of July, when Israel bombed a residential building in southern Beirut, killing Hezbollah commander Fuad Shud and 5 civilians, including children, while injuring dozens more. Israel further shocked the world by assassinating Hamas political leader and head ceasefire negotiator Ismail Haniyeh, while he attended the presidential inauguration in Iran. Hezbollah and Iran have vowed to respond harshly, and the US has played dumb, while sending major reinforcements to the region to protect Israel from the consequences. Meanwhile, the Israelis have continued to mass slaughter Palestinians, with a recent school bombing that killed 100 people. As the world awaits the response from the resistance axis, it's clear we've entered a new and more dangerous phase of this war. Many are wondering if this will be the trigger for all-out war, if there are any red lines the US will ever enforce, and if the genocide in Gaza will ever end. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by veteran war correspondent and analyst, Elijah Magnier. Elijah, welcome back to Dispatches.
Hello, Rania, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining me again. You have written so many excellent pieces about this latest escalation. So I encourage people, after they're done watching this episode, to go check out those pieces on your website, which we'll mention at the end of the show. But to start with, I figured we could start with some of the more recent maybe news. I want to obviously ask you about these recent assassinations of the Hamas leader as well as the Hezbollah commander, and the Iranian response we're waiting for to that. But first, I just want to quickly share this statement that was just released that I'm sure you've already seen. It was a joint statement from the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK on the Middle East. It was tweeted out by Keir Starmer. I'm not, gonna all of it, because why do that? You can go read it yourself, and here it is on screen. But I just want to say that basically what we're getting from the Europeans, as we've already gotten from the Americans, is a condemnation of any potential Iranian escalation, or as they call it, escalation, but it would be a retaliation for what was an act of aggression by the Israelis, and also a condemnation of any future acts of retaliation by Hezbollah, not even mentioning the acts that Israel carried out. Are we surprised to see this from France, Germany, and the UK? Not really. But I guess I wanted to start there just to kind of get your comment on this statement from these three, dying colonial powers.
First of all, this doesn't come from out of the blue moon. On the contrary, it comes because Hamas said there is no need to negotiate further. We have accepted the proposal forwarded by President Joe Biden, who mentioned that this is an Israeli proposal and not an American or a Hamas proposal, or the one that was drafted by all the negotiators, i.e. Qatar, Egypt, even the United States, represented by the CIA chief, or the Mossad and the Shabak. He said that comes from Israel. And Hamas accepted it. And the day Hamas acknowledged Benjamin Netanyahu attacked Rafah and occupied Rafah, and he's returning to the north and to the center of Gaza. In the last 24 hours, Hamas said there is no need to negotiate on Thursday, because this is what Benjamin Netanyahu said. He would like to send again the team of negotiators, but bear with me, I'm going to tell you what he did also. So Hamas responded, there is no need to negotiate further because we have agreed on everything, and we agree on the Israeli proposal. Now, what Benjamin Netanyahu did, he had a meeting of the war cabinet, excluding the Mossad and the Shabak internal security chief and the chief negotiator. It means they were not informed, they have no authorities, and he brought out two additional points that he would like to include. So every time he sent the negotiating team, he adds between 2 to 4 additional points, which make the negotiation impossible, according to the Mossad chief David Barnea, because he is the one who is attacking Benjamin Netanyahu, criticizing him, and there is a lot of information coming out in the Israeli media about the disagreement between the negotiators team and Benjamin Netanyahu, to the moment today that the defense minister Yoav Gallant exploded the bomb, saying it is Israel who is responsible for the failure of the negotiation and not Hamas. And immediately Netanyahu's office replied, almost accusing Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who accused the Palestinians of being animals who cut the water, electricity, food, medical supply on Gaza, who is an ex-assistant of a chief of staff, who is a soldier, who is the most fanatic of the right wing in the Likud party, almost accusing him of treason because he said he needs to criticize Yahya Sinwar, and not Israel for the negotiation, because Hamas refused to send the negotiating team. How Hamas can negotiate when Netanyahu is killing the chief negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, and express his intention, including the chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, to kill Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who replaced the assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Iran.
It is really just incredible. I mean, we're this close to Netanyahu calling his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, a Hamas sympathizer. And we can get more into some of the ways that Netanyahu has, as you mentioned, essentially pushed out the advice of his entire security cabinet to protect his own, political future. But I want to move to what the Israelis did to bring us to the level of escalation that we're at right now as we await this Iranian and Hezbollah response, and that's to the assassinations of Hezbollah's Fuad Shud and Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh. You, in one of your recent articles, called the Israeli assassinations tactical victories, but noted that despite them being tactical victories, Netanyahu has not achieved any significant success in the prisoners' negotiations or in controlling the Gaza Strip. He's also failed to impose a new deterrence equation on the axis of resistance, which has begun serious preparations for war. So let's before we get into too much of that, I want to ask you specifically about the significance of these assassinations that you did call tactical victories. And let's maybe start with the assassination of Hezbollah's Fuad Shud, who I just learned you actually have had the opportunity to meet him in the past. So what is the significance of Israel's assassination of Fuad Shud?
First of all, Fuad Shukr is not one of the mastermind of the attack on the US Marines, because he was 21 years old at the moment of the attack, and he was a member of the Lebanese security forces, Amn al-Am, and he was an official member of the security forces. Of course, he was supporting the resistance. He contributed in attacking the Israelis on Khaldi at the entrance of Beirut, when Ariel Sharon moved his tanks to occupy Beirut with the objective of expelling the PLO and all the Palestinian organizations from Lebanon. Secondly, Fuad Shukr is a commander, member of the Jihadi Council, one of the members. There are many members of the Jihadi Council, all capable, all part of the old guards, all have had and still have high responsibility. They dealt with supporting Palestine, with fighting the Israelis, etc. And at the beginning of the war, he was appointed as the leader to run the war, because the head of the Jihadi Council is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and he needs an assistant who is the one who's running the battle with all these finicky details, etc. Um, Assassinating one member of the axis of the resistance doesn't mean a lot because the axis of the resistance is a non-state actor with a strong ideology, with horizontal leadership. Removing one, there's immediately another one who would replace him. And I can assure you that there are at least 8 people waiting in a line to replace him. Therefore, and it has already been replaced as far as I know. Therefore, killing Fuad Shukr is just a tactical victory that did not change anything in the capability of Hezbollah or in the course of this war. On the contrary, since that day, we've seen an increase of attack from Hezbollah against Israeli objectives, but not only that we've seen strategic attacks where Hezbollah is discovering and testing the Iron Dome and the hole in the Iron Dome to decide the day they want to send precision missiles in case Netanyahu goes to an all-out war, to be able to defeat the Iron Dome and inflict serious damage on Israel. And that has been tested in the last 48 hours, and it has been tested in the last 10 months of fighting, because since the 8th of October, Hezbollah was part of this war. This is why eliminating a person doesn't change anything when there are many replacements, and everybody in the Jihadi Council has a huge team behind him working. So the same team will continue the job and the running of the current war, depending on the decision of the leader, Sayyid Nasrallah. This is why I said it is a tactical victory. It's still a victory because he managed to identify him and he managed to localize him in a particular position, but it was a breach of the red line because he attacked Beirut. The suburb of Beirut is part of the capital, and he killed him in a building where there are civilians, and many civilians lost their life. And this is why Lebanon, according to the UN Article 51, has the right to defend itself, as announced by the Prime Minister Najib Mikati, that Lebanon will defend itself and has the right to retaliate.
And I think a lot of what you said also can apply in terms of assassinating a leader of a non-state actor, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas. In the case of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh is not going to change the axis because there's a team. In the case of Ismail Haniyeh, though, this wasn't a military commander. This was actually the head of the political committee of Hamas. And now he's been replaced by a military commander, which is Yahya Sinwar. So I'm curious if you could speak about the significance of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the fact that it took place in Tehran, and then to elaborate on that, attaching that significance to the fact that he's been replaced by a figure like Yahya Sinwar, who is, has risen in popularity, is actually involved, unlike Ismail Haniyeh, in the military calculations of insecurity calculations of Hamas in Gaza.
In many interviews in the last 10 months, I have always highlighted the fact that the negotiators in Qatar or in Egypt always go back to the Hamas leadership in Gaza, because they are the one who decide how far to negotiate with Israel, because they are the one who have 82% of the fighters and commanders have lost their families in the bombing, massacred by the Israelis. They are living exactly the same conditions as everyone in Gaza, and they are the one who dictate the tempo on Hamas outside. And we have the confirmation from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, just a few days ago, saying at the end of the day, it was Yahya Sinwar who was dictating the terms of the negotiation on the negotiators in Qatar and Egypt. Therefore, the Americans who approved the attack were also knowledgeable about the role of Yahya Sinwar, even when Ismail Haniyeh was around and leading the negotiation in Qatar and absorbing all the pressure that Egypt was exerting on Hamas. Now, knowing that, it means that Ismail Haniyeh and his team, all of them, were acting according to the will of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. Now we have it more official that Yahya Sinwar is the one. Not only that, is more challenging to Israel, saying exactly what was recognized today by the Israeli defense minister, that the total victory is a nonsense. As Benjamin Netanyahu was saying, it's a total victory. Hamas, by appointing Yahya Sinwar, is saying we're still good, we're still fighting. There were many military reports that out of 24, 22 battalions of Hamas have recovered their capability and they're attacking. And in fact, we've seen attacks we have never seen in the last 10 months, indicating that there is not only regroupment, but also an increase of quality and ambush to the Israeli occupation forces and Hamas by the Palestinian resistance. Therefore, the meaning of assassinating a chief negotiator is a message that Benjamin Netanyahu is directing toward the far right in his government, saying, continue supporting me because I am capable of attacking Hamas and killing all the Hamas members, exactly what Netanyahu said in front of the Congress when he went to Washington, that he's going to kill all the Hamas members. Now, killing Haniyeh in Tehran is very significant. It is an indication that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to drag the axis of the resistance to Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen into an all-out war, or to bring the Americans into the battlefield so they can calm down everybody so he can get away with the assassination. It doesn't work like that, because the axis of the resistance knows out of experience that allowing Netanyahu to get away with one similar act, it means after a couple of weeks, he will repeat it, and he will repeat it double or triple or quadruple. They will kill more key leaders in the axis of the resistance and in the heart of the capital of the axis of the resistance, like Lebanon or Iran or Damascus, because on the same day, a few hours later, he assassinated an Iranian advisor in Damascus. Right. And then the Americans attacked Hashd al-Shabi in Baghdad. And a few days before, Benjamin Netanyahu attacked Hodeidah harbor in Yemen. So all that is a bouquet of action that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to get away with it, because the axis of resistance cannot allow him to do so. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean they're going to fall into his game and go into an all-out war so he can turn away the attention from all the massacres he's committing in Gaza, more than 3,400 plus massacres he has committed in the last 10 months, and 5 in only 1 week against the Palestinians, and nobody's moving. This is his wishful thinking to divert the attention away and start screaming, I am attacked by Iran and its allies, to cover up what he has done. Now, there is a lot of talk in Iran that they want to direct the hit to Netanyahu to a point where he would not dare to do it again. But it doesn't mean launching missiles only, but most probably going toward the nuclear program, because that could be a more of a deterrence to the Israelis and a message to the world. Look at the bully of the Middle East that is dragging us to create a nuclear bomb when we don't want that, but we need to defend ourselves against him. And that would be also one form of attack that Iran can do, plus the missile attack that Iran promised to do so against a sensitive Israeli military targets. But of course, Iran is 1,700 kilometers away, and all the satellites will be seeing as soon as one missile will leave any position in Iran in direction of the area that is occupied by Israel, whatever it is in Haifa or Tel Aviv or any other place. So this is why the curse of the geography is upon Iran, but also upon Yemen, 2,000 kilometers, Iraq, 1,500, 1,700 kilometers. So the only axis of the resistance member that can carry the burden of inflicting serious damage on Israel is Lebanon. But it doesn't mean they need to go to an all-out war. This is where we are in a delicate situation where there is a careful selection of objectives that are going to be hit soon.
Yeah. Before I move into to the next topic on this, I just want to thank Jerry Henkel for donating in the chat, and just wanted to remind everyone that you can donate in the live stream chat. On top of that, you can help support Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member and getting access to various perks. And most importantly, the easiest thing you can do is make sure you smash that like button. The more likes on the on this episode that we get, the more it boosts us in the algorithm. Because the algorithm doesn't like us the way it likes CNN. So anyways, Elijah, those are all really important points, and I want to sort of expand on some of them. And I think it's really important what you're talking about with regard to the sort of corner, maybe corner is not the right word, but the situation that the axis of resistance powers have been placed in. You talk about the curse of geography, and then there's also this delicate balance, like they have to calibrate this response, and they have to respond to Israel, because if they don't, like you said, the Israelis will take that as an invitation to do it again, but times 2, times 10, because and so they have to calibrate their response to reestablish deterrence against the Israelis, while also not triggering an all-out war, because the important thing here is the axis of resistance still does not want an all-out war. That said, you've mentioned how they, the axis of resistance is nonetheless preparing for war. So as we enter this new stage, I'm curious if you can talk about some of the challenges that the Axis powers face, because this is a very difficult balance. And it does seem that Israel at this point, under Netanyahu at least, is willing to tolerate being hit if, as long as the U.S. can intercept most of the missiles. So under this situation where you have this almost like protective, it's bigger than the Iron Dome, because you've got the US, all these regional powers and other powers jumping in to put together this coalition to make sure that very few, if any, missiles, if they're launched by Iran, actually hit Israel. And then you have Hezbollah in a situation where, yes, they are the most likely to respond in a way that would at least actually inflict some consequences on the Israelis because of geography, but they don't want to trigger an all-out war either. So, I mean, all we can do is sit here and speculate, but what do you do in this situation? It seems like the Axis powers are between a rock and a hard place here.
Yes and no. You have a point, but if I may, I will explain a bit in which conditions the axis of the resistance is. First of all, Iran, according to this constitution, 153, Article 15234, it is obliged to support the oppressed people around the world, Muslim or non-Muslim. We've seen Iran supporting South Africa against the apartheid regime, supporting Venezuela, supporting the Sunni in Palestine, the Kurds in Iraq, the Shia and the Sunni in other parts of Iraq, and the atheists in Syria and the secular regime in Syria. Therefore, of course, without omitting the Shia in Lebanon. This is why Iran doesn't need to go to war. It needs to continue supporting the oppressed people around the world according to its constitution. For Syria, it's exactly the same. And for Iraq, it's the same. Yemen is in the same position. And also Lebanon is not to be excluded. Because the center of attention is Palestine, any war that diverts the attention away from Palestine will turn the attention of the world away from what's happening in the Middle East. And we will return to the same narrative. Oh, that difficult part of the world, impossible to understand what's happening. We don't want to have anything to do with it. They are fighting among themselves. It's over. And people will turn away and the page on Palestine, and we forget about all the massacres that the Palestinians have suffered from, and the theft of the land that the Zionists started in 1917 when the Balfour Agreement declaration was given to the Zionist movement. This is why it is important to keep the focus on Palestine. The second point is Lebanon, where the heaviest burden falls on Lebanon. So far, Lebanon has been engaged in a war against Israel where more than 50 to 60 villages have been destroyed and more than 500 people killed. Among these, there are civilians, there are medical staff, and there are children and women. So Lebanon has taken its part of the war with several $billion of losses in a moment where the Lebanese government doesn't have the money and doesn't have the means to reconstruct because of the devaluation of the local currency and the game of the dollar that the Americans played on Lebanon 5 years ago. Therefore, the main area that was destroyed is the area that supports the resistance, that supports Palestine, and that support the Lebanese resistance. And they are the one carrying mainly the burden at the moment, notwithstanding all the voices that standing against the resistance, but all these people live in an area that is outside any danger, and they actually live comfortably, but they are pro-Americans, which is not a bad thing, because at the end of the day, in case of a big war, the Lebanese community that supports the resistance and needs to find a shelter, they can always find refuge in a safe area where America is not going to bomb its own people. So having said that, today Hezbollah is walking on the edge of the abyss. Yoav Gallant said today he doesn't want an all-out war like Netanyahu. So we understand that Netanyahu wants an all-out war, and Yoav Gallant, that represent the opinion of the army and the armed forces and the security forces, is aware that the army is incapable of going into another war. Nevertheless, Netanyahu would understand that because he is one of the most clever Israeli politicians in Israel. This is why he has attracted the Americans, screaming that he needs help because Iran is going to attack him, and disregarding what he has done in provoking Iran into a war, provoking Hezbollah into a war, and because he bombed both capitals, assassinating a guest that is in Tehran and bombing a civilian building in Beirut, regardless the presence of the commander. If he has such a wonderful intelligence information and human intelligence about Fuad Shukr, why he did not wait before he entered the building or when he was leaving? Why destroying the building with all the inhabitants, killing 7 civilians and wounding between 60 to 80 people? That is a murder and a provocation and a violation of international laws. So Hezbollah is gradually increasing the attacks on the Israelis and no longer allowing the Israelis to go beyond the rules of engagement. Nevertheless, as the Israelis have killed a commander in a civilian area, Hezbollah has the right to kill a commander in an Israeli civilian area, because this is what Hezbollah is learning from the Israelis, the best example to send back to Israel. So for Israel, it's tolerated to kill a commander in a civilian area, which leads us to think, as military analysts, that the Israelis accept the Hezbollah hit of a high-ranking military commander in the civilian area and needs to swallow the consequences. Otherwise, there will be an escalation. But we also see that there is a wisdom in the axis of the resistance, where the Hezbollah doesn't start from the end. It starts from the beginning, and it escalates gradually, inviting the Israelis to follow suit, as Israel and the rest of the world understands that the Israelis cannot invade Lebanon because They don't have tanks, according to the Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi. They don't have trainers for new tanks, and they have the armed divisions completely crippled. Therefore, it is impossible to invade Lebanon because with an air force, because nobody surrendered to the jet. So
Mhm.
what the Israelis have in their head is to bomb Lebanon. In this case, they will force the Hezbollah to bring out some of the most advanced precision missiles that they have, solid fuel missiles that they can deploy and launch within few minutes only, and flood the interception missile system that Israel has to create a corridor for their precision missiles. It doesn't mean that these precision missiles are going to start raining on Israel. No. The objective is not to fall into Netanyahu's hand and to go to his field whenever he wants to drag Hezbollah into an all-out war. But it doesn't mean that Hezbollah is afraid of a war. Otherwise, Hezbollah would not have started a war on the 8th of October and gave all the reasons for Israel to retaliate and to invade Lebanon or to go much harder on Lebanon. Therefore, we can see the deterrence that has been established with Benjamin Netanyahu going out of his way, but for another reason, which, if I may, I can elaborate
Please,
on.
please, yes.
So Benjamin Netanyahu, when he started the war, he was the one accused of the failure of preventing Hamas from crossing the Gaza Strip and attacking all the Gaza envelope villages. And he is also accused of corruption. Therefore, he understands he was in a very difficult position. Benny Gantz, the former chief of staff and a minister, who became a war minister in Benjamin Netanyahu's small war cabinet, had the majority of the Knesset and the support of the politicians. And Benny Gantz had 42 seats in the Knesset supporting him when Netanyahu had around 18. After 8 months, and what Netanyahu did, attacking Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iran, he has increased his popularity and he has become much more popular. Today, Benjamin Netanyahu can count on at least 28 to 30 seats in the Knesset, and he can count on more than 52 to 53 between the right wing, the far right wing, and the Zionist right wing, which means that Netanyahu feels much more comfortable politically in his position today after what he has done, dragging the Americans into the Middle East to protect him and to make sure that the war is not going to spill over because nobody wants it. The Americans don't have appetite to start shipping plastic bag back home because they will be hit in their military bases. For what? For the glory of one person, which is Benjamin Netanyahu, who has most of his government, apart from the far right security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and the finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, he has only the support of these two people. So for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Americans are not going to start losing lives and see their military bases bombarded. It doesn't mean they can't destroy and inflict serious damage on Iran from afar, or on Lebanon, or Yemen, or Iraq, or Syria, but they will have serious wounded, and Israel will bleed near death. Therefore, everybody will feel the suffering and the consequences of an all-out war. And this is what Benjamin Netanyahu is gambling on, and this is why he brought the Americans to stop the escalation, because he wants to escalate, he wants to provoke, but he wants the Americans with him if he wants to go to an all-out war, because he is incapable to achieve, according to Yoav Gallant, the defense minister today, in 10 months, the total victory, because Hamas cannot be defeated. Israel has lost the war. Israel won the destruction of the civilians, the infrastructure, committed genocide, war crime, crimes against humanity, to the under the eyes of the whole world watching what Israel is doing. But it has failed to defeat Hamas. This is what the Israeli defense minister acknowledged today, that the Palestinian resistance have won over the strongest army in the Middle East and one of the strongest in the world. So this is what Benjamin Netanyahu is finding difficult to acknowledge. However, he is not far from it today, because today he is in much better position politically, and he may not go home with his army if they return home, and he may not go to the jail if, without Benjamin Netanyahu, nothing can be done in Israel, and with Benjamin Netanyahu, nothing can be done in Israel. Securing his political position gives him enough incentive to perhaps change his mind and go for a potential reconciliation with his member of the government, his army, listen to the security forces, and perhaps start accepting the negotiation and the terms of negotiation in the next weeks.
It's really just insane to watch Israeli society and the way they're just openly acting, with the defense of rape. I mean, as a weapon. I actually want to ask you before we get into, because people also, by the way, keep asking in the chat. I see they want to know when Iran is going to hit, and no one actually knows when Iran is going to retaliate, but we can speculate a bit about that. But first, I want to ask you about something else that you wrote about, and that you've actually witnessed, and that is what you referred to as Israel's dirty diplomacy. Amidst all of this awaiting Iran's response, what happened over the weekend was that Israel bombed a school where thousands of people were sheltering. It was supposed to be a safe area, but as we know, there are no actual safe areas in Gaza. And they killed around 100 people while they were praying. I'm sure you saw some of the images, Elijah. It's sometimes you think you've seen the worst, and then you see more horrors, and you're just wondering, how is this still going on 10 months later? People were just shredded. Their bodies were completely shredded and unrecognizable. But you refer to this as dirty diplomacy, and I'm going to quote you from one of your recent pieces on this issue. You say, "This strategy demonstrates destructive power, instills fear, and weakens the opponent's morale by suggesting that continued resistance will lead to even more civilian casualties and suffering. The Israeli occupation army has been using this tactic for months, killing between 30 and 100 civilians a day in Gaza. The lack of international accountability for these actions, which amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, has allowed this approach to continue." And then you also added some historical context to this. So I'm curious if you can explain to our audience what you mean when you say dirty diplomacy, because, of course, Israel does tend to carry out these big massacres whenever ceasefire negotiation meetings are coming up. And that's what we're seeing happen now. There's a ceasefire negotiation meeting that Hamas says they're not going to participate in because for other reasons that you already explained at the beginning. It's happening on August 15. But as that date approached, Israel carried out this horrific massacre of what you call dirty diplomacy.
Dirty diplomacy is also called as cohesive diplomacy or strategic diplomatic violence. And it aims to work on the psychology of the other side, killing as many civilians as possible to break the will of the enemy. It has been done in the Algerian War in 1954 by the French, who for more than a year tried to break the Algerian National Liberation Front, and they've killed more than 1 million people, and they have failed to break the will of the resistance. So basically, Israel has learned to act in dirty diplomacy, to apply it, but hasn't learned from history that this diplomacy did not work, because it didn't work in Leningrad during the Second World War, 1941, when the German army besieged the whole city and exactly did what Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, announced at the beginning of this war. cutting all the food supply line to starve the population. And they have subjected the civilians to systematic bombing to break their morale and break the morale of the defenders. We've seen that also by the UK and the Allies when they have bombed Dresden, which is a non-strategic city in 1945, I think February 1945, and they have killed more than between 50 to 130,000 civilians with no strategic aim, just to break the will of the German army. We've seen that in the Vietnam War. The Americans did that in 1955 when they went burning village after village, attacking the civilians, destroying the infrastructure to weaken the resolve of the population, but they have failed again. And we've seen that again in the Rwanda Civil War, 1994, when the Hutu-led government launched a genocide attack against the Tutsi, and they've killed 800 people in 100 days. I mean, Netanyahu killed and wounded more than 220,000, but the Houthi killed 800,000 people in 100 days. And again, they have failed to defeat their enemy, and the resistance prevailed. So all these examples, it's exactly the same modus operandi that Benjamin Netanyahu is adopting today in Gaza, killing systematically every single day between a minimum of 30 to a maximum of 100 or 120 civilians. And when he doesn't find a target, he goes against the tents, sorry,
bless you,
against the schools, against the gathering of the civilians to break the will of the resistance. But he didn't understand that the Israelis tried to push the Palestinians to flee Palestine since 1917, 1940, 1948. They've committed massacre after massacre. They have settlement built on the massacred Palestinian villages. They have parking places on villages that have been wiped out by the Zionists. And they are repeating exactly the same thing with Gaza today and soon with the West Bank, slowly but surely. And what they are faced with, a stiffer resistance. People understand today more why there is a need to support the resistance, because an occupier cannot win. Palestine has no right in front of the world to allow the occupation forces to win and set an example for the Israeli to win over Palestine. And this is exactly why the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank have accepted the sacrifices, which is something that ordinary people cannot bear. But they have accepted to watch their family killed, and they continue fighting against the Israelis. But above all, they don't want to leave. And that is the ultimate objective of Benjamin Netanyahu, who's still negotiating, even in the last 48 hours with Egypt, to open the borders, to allow at least 100 to 200,000 Palestinians to flee from Gaza, because he believes that opening the gate will push at least 1 million Palestinians outside Gaza, and he can start exterminating those who remain, exactly as the Zionists did with the Palestinian villages and cities before declaring the state of Israel and after that. Now, the will of the Palestinians is stronger than the dirty diplomacy that Benjamin Netanyahu is exerting. And this is why people around the world are supporting Palestine, because they feel ashamed of not contributing, at least with a word, with the participation of social media, with supporting anyone who is talking about the Palestinians, who are supporting the Palestinian cause and bringing out more understanding what Israel is doing. That is the minimum contribution we can all do. And that is at least we can do to honor those who are standing against the occupiers wherever they are in the world.
Real quick, just a shout out to Gregor, Sam, and Megan for donating in the live chat. And you mentioned something about the West Bank. I just want to say the Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz, according to Israeli media, met over the weekend or recently with the heads of the illegal West Bank settlements. And he said to them, the refugee camps are the epicenter of evil. And then went on to name specifically the Jenin refugee camp, saying it must be evacuated of its citizens and it must be handled similarly to the Gaza Strip. I mean, what's been happening in the West Bank could be considered a war as well, though. If it wasn't for Gaza, that would be making international headlines because there's been a lot of resistance in the West Bank, and Israel has actually been carrying out airstrikes in the West Bank. They clearly want to eliminate all Palestinian life in historic Palestine. That's who's in charge of Israel right now. And historically, they've spoken out of like two sides of their mouths, one way to the international community and then one way domestically. But now it's kind of just become speaking one way, and it's how they really feel. So everyone hears the genocidal rhetoric. That's always been there, even at its founding, like you mentioned, with what it did to Palestinian villages at its founding, that it's carrying out now in Gaza. But you mentioned dirty diplomacy. So I wanted to ask you if you think the issue of rape falls into that. I mean, we see rape systematically being used as a weapon, Elijah, to the point where you have this not even being debated. You have Israeli media hosting the rapists caught on video doing it in these basically torture centers Israel's created to come and explain and justify what they're doing. Is this a part of Israel's dirty diplomacy? Where do you put the systematic rape that we're witnessing take place? Where do you put that in Israel's arsenal of weapons?
It is beyond dirty diplomacy because it's related to the culture. The Israelis understand that in the Middle Eastern culture, rape is very shameful for the member of the family who is raped, or who, if it is male or female, and for the same other members of the family, not the same house, but the cousins, etc., and in the neighborhood where these people live. Therefore, the Israelis are exerting much more than dirty diplomacy here. But I'm not sure about if Zionism allows the intercourse with animals, because Yoav Gallant considered the Palestinians as animals, and they think that raping animals is something tolerated in Zionism culture. But I think when the Israelis demonized the Palestinians, then they can do anything to them. When they consider every woman or man or child a Hamas member, or a member or a person to be eliminated, or not a person but animals to be wiped out, then they think they can do anything to break their will. Killing civilians in Gaza with tens of thousands in 10 months was not enough to break the will of the Palestinians. So what they are doing now is they move to something different. And they have given an example where Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib in Iraq look really like amateur doing in front of what the Israelis are doing in their jails. And this is not something that you and I can say. We just need to go back to what the Minister of Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has the responsibility of all prisons in Israel, is saying that he doesn't want to give food to the Palestinians, that he starved them, he doesn't give them any medical service, he violates all the convention, Geneva Convention, the United Nations Convention, all the agreements of how to treat a prisoner of war, or a normal prisoner, or a civilian that is accused and be held administratively, which means without any guilt and without knowing why he was arrested. Therefore, they have moved to something else. The Israelis have moved to the humiliation of the person in his honor, not killing the family, because killing family members, these are considered in the Middle East as martyrs, and therefore they are in a better place in the Middle Eastern philosophy and ideology. But being raped and left alive and sent back to his people and put that on camera and speak about it, and then come out the Israeli soldier who committed these rapes against male prisoners, removed his camouflage of his head and showed his real picture and his real figure, and even spoke about his right to do so against the Palestinians. So rape became a right, which is a strong indication of the degeneration of such a society, particularly when the court failed to accuse this soldier of committing rape, which means that the level of moral or immoral is covering the entire Israeli society, including its justice system, its government, its army members, its population, because today more than 70% support Netanyahu in his doing, which means that they support anything that Netanyahu, his government, and his army, the highest immoral army in the world, the Israeli army, are doing today with the Palestinian population. So today we see in the West, animals have more rights than the Palestinians in Palestine. The Israelis are in a position where it is shameful on anyone in the world to associate himself or herself with any Israeli who support this government, hence supporting the acts of this government. And this is today is overwhelming in the Israeli society, which means the entire Israel is responsible for what its soldiers are doing and bragging overtly about it. That is the dangerous act. So they are going into every individual in his entourage, in his clan, in his tribe, in his neighborhood, in his city. But this is why it is important to highlight these issues, because the society needs to protect these men and women who are raped by the Israelis. If the Israelis have no shame, no principles, no value, and they consider other human beings as human, I think it is important for the Palestinian society to embrace these people and make sure that this is not a system that the Israelis can break their will with. And this is only one way of resisting against the occupier.
Elijah, I want to move back to the issue of Iran's looming response. Given, you're obviously been watching this region and you're a military analyst, what do you I saw that you tweeted, I mean, again, I want to, this is speculation, but I saw that you tweeted that despite the fact that the Israelis have been saying the response from Iran is imminent, it's going to happen today or tomorrow, which it might, we don't know. You said you still don't think it'll happen before the ceasefire negotiations on August 15th. So I'm just curious, what do you take into consideration when you come up with your timeline of when you think it'll happen? And what kind of response do you think we're looking at here?
I'm going to answer that, but if I may, I would like in small parenthesis, you spoke about the West Bank and I forgot to mention something.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah. Let's touch on that. Yeah.
So I really invite the audience to go on Jewish Library, 1977, Likud Party, and read. The Likud Party considers that the West Bank is in an Israeli territory, that Israel is from the river to the sea, and that the presence of every Palestinian is a danger to the Israeli government and to the Israeli as a nation. This is what the Likud Party, the party of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, says. I will move to Iran. I think we are in front of an important event that is on Thursday. The Israelis said they want to negotiate, and they want to negotiate a peace agreement with Hamas, although we know that the Israelis are not serious about it. And many people consider that the Israelis are playing games, and then they really don't want to go to any peace agreement with the Palestinians. This is why Netanyahu, once it brings out the withdrawal of the Netzarim corridor that divides Gaza in the middle, or the Philadelphia corridor with the border with Egypt, and he doesn't want to pull out. And in some other time, he says that I want to control anyone who returns to north of Gaza. And then he brings out another point that he wants to dictate all those who will be free, Palestinian prisoners will be free, and he wants to select them. And then he imposed another condition that he wants the name of all the Israeli captives that are still alive. So every time he's inventing something. Nevertheless, in my guess, the axis of resistance cannot start attacking before allowing Thursday to go by. And that is my guess, because they don't want to look like giving additional reason for Netanyahu to sabotage the negotiation. So the moment the negotiation is not happening, any time after that is good to go. Nevertheless, we've heard Hezbollah leader Said Nasrallah saying there is no rush. And we heard the Israelis saying that they have emptied the shelves of the supermarket. With the Israeli government had distributed satellite phone on all the institutions in case the communication is hit. They bought thousands of generators in case the electricity is hit. So they understand what they have done. And the Israelis officials understand what is coming and what can be inflicted upon Israel to go and kill two non-strategic value targets and assassinated them in Beirut and in Tehran. So it doesn't really make any sense for the wide audience, but it makes sense for Netanyahu because he has achieved what he wanted, which is to move additional political support on his side to the point where today he feels more comfortable among the Knesset, even if the Knesset is on holiday for 3 months, but he has the political support behind him. Now, it is important for Iran to hit with ballistic missiles because drones prove to be ineffective from 1,700 kilometers away. This is what Yemen has been trying in the last 9 months. And the interception missiles of NATO, led by the US, along the Red Sea and in the Mediterranean, are waiting 24 hours a day just to support Israel and help Israel intercept these drones and missiles instead of stopping the suffering of the population in Gaza. Therefore, using drone is not effective. Using cruise missiles is also not effective because it's the flying of the cruise missiles according to the topography on the road that is encountering to reach its objective slows down its flight pattern and gives more possibility for the jets in the air to destroy the cruise missiles. What is left is the ballistic missiles, and ballistic missiles need to go outside the atmosphere and fall down on Israel. And we've seen at least 8 of these ballistic missiles hitting their targets last April when Iran, for the first time, directly hit Israel in response to the assassination and the destruction that was committed by the Israeli at the consulate in Damascus, violating international laws. Therefore, Iran promised to hit. It could be the nuclear dossier included and maybe not, but it needs to launch ballistic missiles. And ballistic missiles are very precise. Therefore, they need to launch solid fuel ballistic missiles, but to launch heavier missiles, they need also to launch liquid fuel ballistic missiles. And liquid fuel ballistic missiles, without informing anyone, they are deployed and they need much more time to be set up to take off. And this exposes it to all the 20 satellites that are above Iran watching everything happening. But there is another factor that Iran, because of these missiles, may travel if they are not ballistic, may travel within the airspace of its neighborhood, then they need to inform neighboring country like Iraq or Syria that there are missiles coming and they will violate their airspace, and they are not hostile to their country, but they are destinated to Israel. That gives an additional information to the Americans to be informed when the attack is going to happen, most likely, and for Israel to be more prepared. Nevertheless, the system around Israel is not unbreakable. And we have seen, for example, in the last 48 hours, when Hezbollah launched several drones against the Israelis, it has managed to bypass the interception missile system that has several levels in Israel, and the interception missiles failed to intercept the Hezbollah drones. Of course, drones are more easily manipulative. They can change direction in any way, but also the Iranian missiles can do that. Some of the Iranian missiles can change speed, and this is why the Americans are aware of that, and they need to put their jets and spend billions of dollars to support Israel to down the missiles that are coming against the Israelis and prevent these missiles from reaching Israel, but not preventing Israel from committing a crime and an attack on sovereign state in Tehran or another sovereign state in Lebanon or in Hodeidah or in Syria.
Yeah, it's really incredible to see the reinforcements that the US has sent in, but it's not sustainable. And this is where I want to ask you. Well, first, I just want to say, with respect to Hezbollah's drones, there was this piece in the AP recently. It's titled "The Threat Israel Didn't Foresee: Hezbollah's Growing Drone Power." And I was struck by a part of the piece that says, "While Israel has intercepted hundreds of drones from Lebanon during the Israel-Hamas war," just that, hundreds of drones from Lebanon during this genocide. That's basically saying that Israel's having to intercept 1 to 3 drones a day on average. That's a really big number of drones. It's a serious drain on air resources, obviously, and Iron Dome interceptors for Israel. It just speaks to the level of sophistication that they're dealing with when it comes to these Axis powers like Hezbollah. But, to the issue of the U.S., can you talk a bit about the reinforcements the U.S. has sent in, and specifically the fact that Israel has demonstrated it is incapable of actually protecting itself on its own? And to me, this seems like a long-term threat, because that's one of the reasons Israel's lost part of its deterrent power, right? Because before it was seen as this, all-powerful, unbeatable military power in the region. But every time it has to face the consequences of one of its horrific acts of aggression towards a power like Iran, the U.S. has to send aircraft carriers and nuclear-armed submarines and throw billions of dollars more at the Iron Dome and get other countries involved to prevent any missiles from hitting Israel. And even then, they can't prevent them all.
So let's start with Hezbollah. According to the Israeli army spokesperson, Admiral Daniel Hagari, more than a month ago, he said that Hezbollah has fired more than 5,000 drones, rocket and artillery and laser-guided missiles against Israeli positions. It already means that we're talking first about a non-state actor. We're not talking about a state. We're talking about an organization that has the support of an important part of the population, and is still a group of people. It is not with the state means and missiles and radars that can be deployed, an air force that can deter the enemy, that has the superiority in the air, etc. We're talking about a small group. If we talk about, if we take the word of Sayyid Nasrallah for granted, as he said, Hezbollah are 150,000 members of the entire organization, we have at least 180,000 professional Israeli soldiers and 350,000 reservists. Now, if you add the 180,000 and 350,000, these are incapable of defeating Hamas. There are more than 5 divisions in Gaza, 364 square kilometers. If you distribute the 5 divisions with their tanks, more than 1,500 tanks and vehicles, armed vehicles that have deployed, and according to some information, they have been destroyed, and the Israeli acknowledge only 500. It doesn't matter. If we deploy all this force, the Americans are making fun of the Israelis today because they are deterred by the Palestinian resistance with very modest means, with bombs that they are creating during this war, reorganizing themselves during this war, which means they are standing against one of the most equipped army in the world, because the whole West supports the Israelis. And the Americans, there are 2,000 Delta forces in Israel. There are generals with warfare, urban warfare experience supporting the Israelis. There are the British in Cyprus offering information and intelligence. The Americans' drones are above Gaza. Everybody is supporting Israel. And yet they are failing to defeat Gaza. So we go from there to Lebanon. When the Israelis are counting the number of missiles, the laser-guided missiles, the rockets, and the drones, and the artillery, from the military approach, when we speak about artillery, is laughable, because a non-state actor deploying artillery on the borders against an air dominance of Israel, that needs not only courage, but a serious problem in the Israeli army. To have a cannon in the middle of an area and start launching artillery against position and not being destroyed, and allow the Hezbollah to use artillery on many occasions, it is really humiliating. We're not talking about the drones and their capability to evade the interception missile system. So if the Israelis are counting the bombs and the drones and the missiles and the artillery, it means they can do very little about it. And what they are doing is trying to destroy anything that is moving in the south of Lebanon. So they went and destroyed 50 to 60 villages. But they've killed Fuad Shukr. Did they change the course of attack of Hezbollah? Of course not. On the contrary, we've seen more attacks. We've seen the drones coming back with footage of the most sensitive military complex, the naval base, submarine base, airports with jets, with helicopters, the chemical complex in Haifa. We have seen wonders on these drones, but the biggest wonder is how these drones are capable of flying above the Iron Dome and returning with these footage, and then going back again and again and again and again, and for Israel to fail, even during this war, because some of these footage are very recent, and Israel is failing because Israel cannot fight against the weakest of the axis of the resistance are the Palestinians, and they failed against them. This is why Benjamin Netanyahu is calling upon NATO. Israel is member of CENTCOM, Central Command, that is sitting in the Middle East, and that is led by the US, where Middle Eastern countries and other countries share intelligence information and support Israel. Therefore, the Israelis are enjoying the military support of the Americans and the West and the French, which have a base in Jordan. The British, they have their naval forces in the Red Sea, apart from Cyprus. So everybody is supporting Israel, and Israel is still incapable. But not only that, when Hezbollah said, I'm going to bomb in retaliation to the attack on my capital, this is what Hezbollah said. What the Israelis do, they believe Hezbollah. They went to supermarket, they emptied the supermarket. The Israeli government is afraid of this attack. We're talking about the strongest army in the world, one of the strongest in the world, but the strongest in the Middle East, with 350,000 plus 180,000 members of the armed forces against a non-state actor, pushing the government to go and establish hospitals in their parking place under the ground, store medical supply, store fuel, buy generators. They know that there is a possibility for their infrastructure to be destroyed, which is a recognition of the strengths of the enemy. It doesn't mean Hezbollah can destroy Israel. No, Israel has a higher capability because it has an unceasable supply of ammunition from America and from Germany, plus the rest of the world. But it means Israel will be severely wounded in case of war against Hezbollah. And the Americans said, we will defend Israel at all cost, but we cannot defend you against Lebanon only because of the geography. Now, that is an advantage and a curse on Lebanon, because Lebanon needs to carry the burden. And Lebanon has the advantage of inflicting serious damage on the Israelis in case Netanyahu wants to go to an all-out war. And I think Netanyahu is not afraid of the Iranian missiles as he is afraid of what Hezbollah can do, not because he cannot destroy Lebanon, he can. And he can turn Lebanon into the Stone Age, but he will be also in another cave in the Stone Age. And this is something that the Israeli society is not capable of assuming, because Hezbollah can inflict serious damage on the domestic front. And this is what the key of the whole problem.
You know, as we begin to wrap here, and I hear the way you're describing Israel's inability to defeat the weakest link in the axis of resistance, which is the Palestinian resistance. And that's only because they're under so much siege and surrounded, and they don't have the same access to outside help as other actors in the axis do. But when I hear you break that down, it sounds like a microcosm of the US in many ways. And what I mean by that is, you know, when I think about the US in a place like Iraq, or the US in a place like Afghanistan, or just any US war since Vietnam. I mean, the US has, despite having overwhelming military power, I mean, despite basically militarily controlling the world and having all this economic hegemony with the US dollar, is incapable and has been incapable for several decades now of defeating its so-called enemies. Whether we're talking, I mean, that doesn't mean they haven't done a lot of damage to their enemies. They have. And here I'm talking, you know, whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the various resistance forces across Iraq, or whether it's just destroying the government in Iran or Syria, or what it's done across Latin America, you know, in Cuba and Venezuela. It's done a lot of damage to these places. However, it has been not only unable to defeat them, but now as we enter this new, you know, if you want to call it a multipolar world, fine, you know, we can say that as we enter a world where there's more poles of power besides the US and people have other options, you see the US being incapable of defeating its enemies, much like the way Israel's incapable of defeating Hamas. And maybe I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, but to me, there's a lot of reasons why the US has ironclad support for Israel. But you know, part of this kind of Western support for Israel, in addition to Israel being this imperialist tool in the Middle East, seems also to be like Israel needs to defeat Hamas to prove that we can still win. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like the West can still win. The West has to be able to defeat these non-state actors that, you know, hit back against their oppressors. So it seems to be almost this like existential crisis for the West on a number of levels. Part of it being like, we have to prove we're still powerful through Israel's defeat of the Palestinians. I'm not sure if you want what you have to add to that.
Well, there is a difference between the West and Israel. in pragmatism.
Yeah.
If you look at the Israelis, the Israeli went to bomb Hodeidah harbor in Yemen, and they have bombed the oil depot. The exact reason why they did that against the Yemeni was a tactical objective, because the only thing they wanted to do, what Netanyahu and his defense minister Yoav Gallant said, look at the oil burning and we continue burning for days. So they're looking for folkloric actions, while the Americans are much more pragmatic, and they prove a serious intelligence when Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin launched an advice to Benjamin Netanyahu and said, don't commit the same mistake we have committed. We have lost we went to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, and we have never earned the heart and mind of the population. Now, that is maturity, which is a recognition of the defeat of the superpower against the will of the population and the resistance. They failed in Afghanistan. They went to defeat the Taliban. After 20 years, they gave back the power to Taliban. They went to Iraq. They went to defeat Saddam Hussein for weapons of mass destruction, and they have been confronted with a stiff resistance from both sides, Sunni and Shia, and now they are unwanted in Iraq, and there is a decision by the parliament that the Americans don't want to fulfill, to pull out all the forces and withdraw from Iraq. In Libya, they've destroyed Libya completely, one of the jewel of Africa, where education, medical attention was free, where there was wealth in the country, and now it is destroyed completely. They went to Syria and they did the same, and they still occupy part of Syria. So the message is the Americans try to bring some reason to Israel, saying our support to Israel is unlimited and unconditional. And to confirm that, Joe Biden abided by the $3.5 billion that Barack Obama allocated yearly to Israel, and he added $26 billion during this war. He shipped and continues shipping bombs every single day by air and by sea. The Germans are doing the same. He's complaining about the behavior of Benjamin Netanyahu, but not because he stands against Israel. On the contrary, he said he's more Zionist than the Zionists. And he said, I don't need to be a Jew to be a Zionist, because he is speaking the truth. He supports unconditionally Israel. And because of that, he's asking the Israelis to stop the war, because Israel is losing in this war. Destroying the infrastructure, killing civilians, militarily speaking, it is far from being a victory. The victory is to achieve the objectives of the war and to defeat the enemy. Israel has failed to achieve any of the objectives set at the beginning. The army said to the prime minister, you have given us unachievable objectives. And the prime minister did not move away from these objectives, did not set other objectives. Secondly, Hamas is regaining the power. Benjamin Netanyahu is sending his delegation to negotiate with Hamas, the people who he vowed to kill to the last one, and he's still negotiating with them. His defense minister is saying, stop. The Herzi Halevi is saying, we don't have any more tanks, stop. We need to stop the war. But he doesn't want to stop the war. So the Americans are committed to the support of Israel, and no doubt about it. And because of that, they see the interest of Israel is to stop and accept the defeats. So they have been, the Palestinians have inflicted upon the Israelis so far, because the Israelis tried everything. They've destroyed the schools, they've destroyed the hospital, they've cut water, electricity, stopped the medical supply, destroy all the roads, wipe complete neighborhood. People don't recognize their home. There are no more homes. And then they went to destroy the tents. And then they went to destroy the UNRWA schools. And then they killed journalists. They killed doctors. They killed teachers, professors, university professors. They've done everything. And they have exhausted their targets of objectives. They have exhausted all the policy that they can think about, the dirty policy, the coercive policy. They have used even rape, and they have failed to break the will of the Palestinian because of one thing. Sorry. Because despite all that and 10 months of war, Yahya Sinwar was appointed the leader of Hamas, and Yahya Sinwar answered, "We do not need to negotiate with you." That's a position of strength. It's not a position of weakness. He is strong. He's saying, we don't want to negotiate with you. We have already given our answer. We have agreed on the paper presented by Joe Biden. We have no more anything to say. So this is why that's a very clever move, because it is a show of strength. It's a demonstration of power. It's a demonstration of control. It's a demonstration of a will to continue fighting. It's a challenging expression, and it's saying to the Americans, if you are honest about a ceasefire, we accept what you called an Israeli offer. Show us if you are a good partner for peace. And if you are not, move away and allow us to continue fighting against Benjamin Netanyahu and his immoral army.
Well, Elijah, I want to thank you for joining me for an hour, more than an hour, to discuss all of these very important topics as we await this Iranian response. Can you please tell our audience where they can follow your excellent analysis?
Thank you for having me.
Well, where can you tell people where they can go for your website? Elijah, can you hear me?
Now you're breaking.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you? I was saying,
Yes,
tell people.
I can hear you now. Yeah,
I was saying, can you tell people where they can follow your excellent analysis?
Because I don't think you have a good internet connection.
Oh, maybe it is my internet connection. Let's see. Hang on. Sorry, guys. All right. Well, if you can't hear me, I'll tell everybody. You can go to ElijahMagnier.com. He has excellent work there. I hope everyone can hear me. And if not, sorry about that. Technological gremlins. Elijah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Rania. It's a pleasure.